Welcome to the First Things First podcast. I'm your host, Jenna Wolfe. Joining me will be the Hall of Famer, Cris and Nick Wright. Chiefs dismissed the Patriots Thursday night. Tom Brady has some strong words for his teammates, and is New England's offense not as explosive as we thought? Plus, how big of a concern is Belichick's defense? Last show of the week. Remember, subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts. Let's get it started. The Chiefs stunned the Patriots with a 42-27 win last night. Did I give that away? Alex Smith had a dominant performance, throwing 4 touchdown passes, including 2 over 70 yards. Tom Brady struggled on the other side most of the night, completing less than half of his passes and throwing exactly 0 touchdowns. However, his defense did him no favors, giving up over 500 total yards of offense. After the game, Brady, not surprisingly, said he was not pleased with his team's performance.
I just think we need to, have more urgency and, go out there and perform a lot better. And that, is a winning attitude and a championship attitude that you need to bring every day. And, we had it handed to us on our own field. And, it's a terrible feeling. And, there's only people that can do something about it in that locker room.
So obviously, guys, there's a lot to break down after this game, but we'll start with this one. Which is more of a concern for the Patriots now, their quarterback or their defense, CC?
It's got to be the defense. Over 500 yards. Tom Brady, I remember a couple years ago, a Monday night game in Kansas City. People had cast Tom Brady, he's over the hill. This is it for him. We're getting ready to watch a decline. I'm not as concerned about him, but the defense, the overall lack of speed, and some parts of this roster that I believe have to be developed in a hurry. I mean, they do not have a linebacker that can cover. It was very evident based on the matchups that Andy Reid in the game last night. Third down, goal line situations, or fourth down, short yardage situations. They've been fabulous at this. New England in game situations has been better than any team that we've seen the last 20 years. Last night, very average to below average on a bunch of these. Not picking up fourth down conversions, not taking the points early because they've always been very, very aggressive as trying to convert those fourth downs and keep those drives going. But I think now we see why Belichick, after winning his 5th Super Bowl, why there was so much roster turnover, why he made so many trades, because they need to upgrade their talent. And they have a number of questions that have to be answered if they're going to defend their championship.
The defense was hugely problematic. You got to go back in the record books to find the last time the Patriots gave up this type of offense, this many yards, this many points at home. But I'm going to point to something that I was not so quietly signaling the alarm bells before the game, and that's a 40-year-old quarterback.
Yes.
I can only say this so many times. Tom Brady has accomplished more than any quarterback ever. If you want to call him the greatest quarterback ever, I'm not going to argue with you. But that doesn't have anything to do with this season. Everything Tom Brady's accomplished in the past is irrelevant to how good is Tom Brady right now. And the Tom Brady I saw yesterday played like a 40-year-old quarterback and was coached like a 40-year-old quarterback. There has never been a guy in league history better at the quarterback sneak.
Yes.
3rd and short or 4th and short. The Patriots in this game last night had 3 chances early, 4th and less than a yard, including a 4th and inches at the 6. They called 0 quarterback sneaks. To me, that is them trying to protect their 40-year-old quarterback. Additionally, Tom Brady last year was very efficient on deep balls, but didn't throw many of them. Only threw 49 deep balls all of last year. Last night, he threw 10. And this Brandon Cooks guy, who everyone said, he's like Randy Moss, except a foot shorter. Okay. Something like that. They didn't seem to exactly be on the same page.
Right.
And on those 10 deep balls, they only had 2 completions and a passer rating of about 60. This is concerning because last year they had struggles on defense early, struggles enough that they traded Jamie Collins. But the offense was able to carry them. I know 27 points usually wins you football games, but last night that did not look like the Patriots offense we've come to expect.
Well, explain this to me then. I counted the number of things you listed that went wrong last night. You came up with 8. You came up with about 4 or 5 just with Tom Brady alone. How is it possible that a Bill Belichick coached team could have been so surprised by what happened? A Bill Belichick coached team playing at home where they win against the Chiefs, who they beat in the season opener, which they usually dominate. How come in the post-game press conferences we hear, we just weren't prepared. We got to be better. How did he not know that this was the level of talent they had if you think they still need to make more changes?
Well, they have to. They're always evolving. Every NFL team is, with the lack of practice time, the lack of physicality. I've told you this. The first 4 games are like the preseason. So teams are evolving going through the month of September. You'll see the real team October and November. They'll develop characteristics which will play to their strength. Belichick didn't know he didn't have a short yardage back. Last night was evidence. So it's not a matter of being surprised. The only thing that could have surprised New England was Kansas City and how many times they lined up in a college offense, a spread offense, and they ran some type of option or misdirection. That's the only thing that could have surprised them. And it only could surprise them a little bit because Andy Reid has done this before with Alex Smith. So from they caught us off guard. No, they didn't catch us off guard. The game was there to be dominated. In the second quarter, when they decided to get too greedy and not go for points, Nick hates that when teams...
No, I like when they go for it on 4th. You're a take the points guy.
Take the points.
You want them to kick the field goal. You don't care about the math. You don't care about the probabilities. That's fine. Go ahead.
Right, so there were a number of things. You know what surprised them, too? The first play of the game, they call a great design play. And anytime you call the first play of the game, you are pretty much predicting what the defense is going to be in. Dwayne Allen, the tight end they got from Indianapolis. He's running wide open down the sideline.
They were right when they predicted it. It couldn't have been drawn up better, right?
Tom Brady's got time. It's exactly how they draw it up in the film room. It's exactly what the players were expecting to see. Tom Brady misses him.
Badly.
Wide open. Now, this is either a touchdown or they're in the red zone immediately. The first 3 drives, you saw Kansas City couldn't stop them. Kansas City made adjustments defensively, and Justin Houston, healthy for the first time in 2 years, eventually is able to win those matchups and get to the quarterback.
The one name we haven't mentioned when you're talking about the Patriots defense is a guy who now all of a sudden the Patriots have a multi-level loss here. Not only do you lose your opener at home, and I'll remind the audience that only one time in NFL history has a team lost its first game of the season at home and gone on to win the Super Bowl. So once, the 0-2 Bucks. So the Patriots behind the 8 ball already. But Dante Hightower leaves that game with a knee injury. Dante Hightower, who the Patriots have won 2 Super Bowls since 2004. Dante Hightower might have made the single biggest defensive play in both of those Super Bowls. Everyone says, the Malcolm Butler interception. Dante Hightower is the one that pulls Marshawn Lynch down.
Yes, the play before.
A play before that allows the Malcolm Butler play to happen. In the game against the Falcons, who has the strip sack on Matt Ryan? Dante Hightower does. He's now out with a knee injury. If it's a tweak, you can move on. If it's a serious injury, that's real problems.
But it's also compounded because they don't have pass rushers. They were trying to use him as a pass rusher, and they have to have one of the slowest group of linebackers that I've seen in the NFL. So he's better at a linebacker, Nick. Hate to cut you off.
No.
He's better at middle linebacker because he can cover, and now they are going to miss him on a couple different levels.
And Jenna, you asked, how could they not be prepared? I don't think they weren't prepared. I just don't think you can go at the press conference afterwards and say, well, our guys aren't good enough. Because the Patriots knew they had a pass rush problem. It's why they spent their first pick of the draft on a pass rusher.
Yes.
But he's on the IR. The Patriots knew Rob Ninkovich would be hard to replace. They thought Shea McClellin could, but he's on the IR.
But I guess my question is, 48 hours ago, prognosticators had this team, maybe not complete on defense, but a fairly complete team on both sides of the ball, perhaps going 16-0, perhaps being one of the best teams and the best Patriots teams we've seen in a long time. And now I find that after one game, we're able to just rip that all to shreds, and we're seeing the weaknesses that they have now that we hadn't talked about. But we
Jenna,
already knew they had a shaky defense.
No. Welcome back to the NFL. This is what we do. We call it, it's typically Crisis Monday. But now it's Crisis Friday because we opened up on a Thursday. Yeah, these are the things, Jenna, that we know on paper. But once you get in the game,
You don't play on paper.
you start to see, wow, every team has deficiencies, but it's the team that can expose your deficiencies during the game. New England could have dominated this game. If they would have gotten up by 14 to 17.
They almost did.
They would have won this game because then, Andy, he can't remain conservative, and Alex Smith is going to have to force it down the field earlier than he wants to.
Quickly, there are so many unprecedented things about this game. I know we're going to talk about it throughout the show. I'm going to try to throw in a different end of the segment stat each time. How about this one? You set up 14 or 17. Just up 10 has been good enough. Going into last night, since Tom Brady took over, the Patriots at home, if they lead by 10 or more points, 102-1. 102-1 in games they are up by 10 or more. Now that is 102-2, and that's not even the most jarring stat from last night. It's crazy how unprecedented last night really was.
And I think at some point we'll have to give Kansas City credit for also coming out there.
Yeah.
Executing their game plan.
Oh, yeah.
to do
Nick-
exactly what
Nick-
they
yeah,
when are we
destined
doing
to
that?
do.
Yeah,
I got
producers?
nervous.
Nick's got
Let's
his
talk some
Kansas City
Chiefs.
is for hustlers up under that.
Show them what's under that tablecloth. Welcome back to First Things First. We don't say this often. In fact, we have to actually practice the sentence. Tom Brady struggled mightily last night. Kansas City beat the Patriots 42-27. Isn't it great, Nick, to talk about games that actually happened?
It is so
It's been a long
good.
time.
It is so
Brady
good.
threw for 0 touchdowns and completed less than 50% of his passes. After the game, Bill Belichick said the Patriots have a long way to go.
But we just really weren't competitive enough, especially on offense and defense. Just made too many mistakes and didn't play well on top of that. Fundamentals weren't good enough. Really nothing was good enough, so we all got to do a better job.
So, Nick, we knew coming in they were going to have to do this without Julian Edelman, but are the rest of Brady's weapons as good as we all thought they were?
Aside from Rob Gronkowski, Brady's weapons have always been predicated on Brady's greatness. We've seen, how many times have we seen guys that were just another guy before they got to Tom Brady and just another guy when they leave Tom Brady excel with Tom Brady? Wes Welker goes from a borderline nobody in Miami to now people talk about him like he's a borderline Hall of Famer after playing with Brady and then Peyton Manning as well, who's obviously Brady's caliber. Chris Hogan? Who was Chris Hogan before he got to Tom Brady? And last year he's second in the league in yards per catch. So I know Tom Brady's still there, but if Tom Brady isn't the Tom Brady we're used to, then all those other guys start being more like what they actually are. And Brady's most important weapon, all of the numbers say, is not Rob Gronkowski, it is Julian Edelman. The Patriots' win percentage with and without Gronk is not that different. The win percentage with and without Edelman now, 84% with Edelman, 40% without him. And if those passes, CC, that were supposed to go to Edelman, start going to Amendola, who, by the way, might have another concussion, that's a whole nother issue, now you're talking a real problem for the Patriots offense.
Let's go down and talk about, because if we're going to talk about Brady, his weapons, his assets, they start with Gronk. Now, Gronk looked like a player who hadn't played in an NFL game in over a year. And that's what happens when you miss a lot of practice and you miss a bunch of games. Didn't participate in the preseason for the most part, and you could see it. Eric Berry guarded him one-on-one, pretty much all over the field. They didn't have to double cover him. So that part of New England's game, that will improve. Like, he will get better. He just looked rusty. He is the best tight end in football. Now, after that, you get into none of these guys. Brandon Cook is not a number one. He'll never be a number one receiver. Number one reason is he's too short. He doesn't play enough in the slot. He likes to play outside the numbers, and short guys outside the numbers, as you mentioned on the deep throws, those are harder throws. Brady likes a short swing pass, choice routes in the slot, or down the middle. He does not have Hogan, 1 for 8. So now with Amendola hurt, if Gronk is the number one, let's say
who's the number?
Okay.
I mean, Cooks is going to have to be your number 2, but your number
Cooks
1 outside.
is a number 2, but Hogan now, he has to be a number 2. He's not a number 2. And Amendola, you can't depend on him. So their ability to throw the short pass, they lose a lot of that with Edelman. And the running back situation, it's hard to develop a rhythm. I thought they should have started and gone with James White. He's the best receiver out of the backfield. We saw what he did in the playoffs and the Super Bowl.
14 catches in the Super Bowl.
So they decided to, okay, we're going to be able to spread this around. Let's try to find out what these other guys can do. And in trying to find out, it got them an L against KC.
Is it that Tom Brady didn't have enough weapons? Is it also perhaps that Kansas City really shut down the whole middle part of that field last night and really left everything open for them outside and they just weren't hitting there?
No, that's a really good point. The point you're making, Chris's point about Eric Berry, and he might have blown his Achilles, which is devastating for a guy who's come back from cancer to be
great story.
One of the best players in the league. Berry Berry's probably one of the 2 best safeties in football. So not a lot of guys are going to be able to cover Gronk one-on-one, even a rusty Gronk. Berry's a special character.
Right.
But the Chiefs' game plan, which was, we're not sending a bunch of blitzers at Brady.
That's what you have to do.
We will give him time. There were times when Al Michaels and Chris Collinsworth, during the play, were almost laughing at how much time Brady had. But those plays didn't often result in positive yards. On plays where Brady had more than 2.5 seconds to throw, he usually gets the ball out in about 2-1. On plays where he had more than 2.5, he was 5 for 19. 5 for 19 with a 56 quarterback rating. So the Chiefs' plan of what you're talking about, Jenna, which is we're just going to cover everything and we'll let Brady sit back there with 3 guys rushing him, that was a really effective strategy, partly because of what you're saying, Cece, the receivers didn't have the talent to get open.
And they avoided Sean Smith, the corner for Kansas City. Marcus Smith.
Marcus Peters.
Marcus Peters.
Yep.
Marcus Peters, he's the only one who sat for the national anthem.
Yeah.
He sat last year. You're talking about an outstanding corner.
They only threw at him 1 time. Cece.
1 time. So Belichick made up his mind before the game. Marcus, I'm going to avoid him. Now, I'm going to try to go at the other guys, but in the one-on-one matchups, guys have to win. So it's partially Brady and also part of the wide receivers and running backs. So you have to spread the blame around. But Tom Brady has got to be better, especially given all the time that he had to throw.
Brady's numbers are jarring, man. I mean, 44% completions when, again, the Chiefs are sitting back in soft zones.
Nick, I got to say this. This whole offseason, you've been kind of, hey, Chris, I think the wall was waiting on Brady. And I've been like, no, man, I'm telling you. I was sleeping in Brady pajamas. He had me. I was ready to eat some green stuff.
Yeah.
Drink all that juice and stuff that he's drinking. But you've been on this for a while that I think this is the wall. I think this is the year.
No matter how great you are, you can be the best ever at something. And still, at some point, you stop being the best ever at it. And when we have 97 years of NFL history.
98 season. Yes.
98th season. So 97 years of history. I had that right.
And 1 game.
There you go.
He'll let you know if he's right.
And we don't have any precedent for guys at this age playing at the level, as Jenna mentioned, Vegas and the general public expects Brady and the Patriots to play at.
Yes.
I just have my curiosities. And we can talk about it later in the show, but this didn't come out of nowhere. Brady was bad in his first playoff game last year.
Yes.
Brady was very bad for 2.5 quarters in the Super Bowl. And so you started to see a guy look like he's 40. And I know people are going to bring up, we did this in 2014 when against the same team. The Chiefs mollywopped the Pats in Kansas City on national television ever since Brady done. You know the difference between 2014 and 2017? 3 years. 3 years of hits. 3 years of having to practice. 3 years of having to travel. That matters. And that's what I saw last night.
What was bad about Tom Brady? Was it his accuracy? Was it his arm strength? Was it his decision-making? Because I'm just wondering if these are things that are a product of old age or a product of rust, because as Cris always says, these first couple games are really an extension of a preseason of which he only played, a couple plays.
Now, if he was Cam Newton, if he was coming off a rotator cuff surgery, I would be more lenient. It's not a matter of arm strength. He didn't have an off-season procedure. It's a matter of Tom Brady, what makes him different than all the other quarterbacks is his accuracy. Tom Brady's ball speaks to you. If you're a wide receiver and I'm running across the middle, if the ball's in front of me, Tom Brady is telling me that there's no defender in front of me. If he throws the ball to my back shoulder, the ball tells me where to go, and you didn't see that last night.
Welcome back to First Things First, and a special welcome to Fox NFL analyst Howie Long. You see him every week on Fox NFL Sunday. Howie, thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, guys, and congratulations on the new show. Welcome aboard.
Thank you very much. All right, so let's get to it. Last night, the Chiefs stunned the Patriots with that 42-27 win. Alex Smith had a dominant performance, throwing 4 touchdown passes, including 2 over 70 yards. Tom Brady struggled most of the night, completing less than half of his passes and throwing exactly 0 touchdowns. So, Howie, what stood out most to you last night besides the results of the game?
Well, I think it's a team that made a lot of acquisitions in the offseason and made a lot of acquisitions right before the season opened. And I think there's going to be a natural, and Cris can speak with more expertise about the kind of continuity needed on offense, but they have a lot of new pieces on offense, and that part of it doesn't concern me. I think that will come, and they'll put up their 30, 31 points a game. There are some issues that are fixable. I think those are the issues. Finding a rhythm, getting an idea of who we are offensively, what we like to do, what this individual does, the matchups that we can dictate through personnel groupings and players. Defensively, there were some blown coverages, once again, some new additions, and they tried to address the pass rushing situation in the offseason with the addition of Coney Ely. They had a high draft pick who ended up going down in training camp. The issues with mix-ups and coverages, those are things that you can address. The thing that's going to be a challenge to address is the pressure and that front 7. And if you've played on a Bill Belichick defense as a New York Giant or a Cleveland Brown, a New England Patriot, a New York Jet, you hear one thing is set the edge. And that wasn't set last night. There were miscommunications and people were turned loose in coverage for them to give up those kinds of drives. This was the #1 scoring defense in football last year, the New England Patriots. But the front 7 doesn't look anything like it did last year, in particular after Hightower went down, because I think they were trying to slide him out and supplement some of that pass rush. Now they're going to have to manufacture pass rush. I think, Nick, you mentioned something about Matt Patricia's pencil in his ear. The reason why it's a pencil is because it's a fluid situation. You can't put it down in marker.
Howie, you mentioned the defense and the concern there. People watch Tom Brady. You've seen him so much. Were you concerned with not only this game, Howie, but the first half of the Super Bowl and those 2 playoff games, the last 4 games with Tom Brady?
No. It's so funny because I remember, because I was shooting a Chevy commercial out in the middle of nowhere, California, the last time they played on Monday night when they put 41 on New England, and Tom Brady was done. Bill Belichick has been figured out. It's time for both of them to go. It's time to move to Garoppolo. We need a new change in New England. What do? They go on and win the Super Bowl. The Patriot team that you saw last night will not in any way resemble the Patriot team that you see week 5, week 12, week 15, and hopefully for them, week 19.
Howie, let's take last night out of it, because going into this season, I believe Brady to be the greatest quarterback ever, but I also know that in football history, quarterbacks at his age continuing to excel, it's nearly unprecedented. So let's pretend last night.
It's a bungee jump, Nick.
What do you mean?
Well, what ends up happening at some point for any player, and you really don't know when it's going to happen, is it's a free fall. You go from here to there quickly. And when it does, you get exploited.
Well, so that's my question. Like, with all due respect and deference to the guy who's maybe the greatest football player ever, Tom Brady, prior to last night, did you have any concern that Brady was approaching that part of the bungee?
Well, you know, I think at some point it's going to happen. He's, 40 years old?
Yeah.
Garoppolo is his backup. Trading Brissett tells you everything you need to know about how they feel about Garoppolo. I think the heir apparent is right there in the wings. And if we know one thing about Bill, even though it would probably be as difficult a decision as he could ever make, when the time comes, and I'm not saying that time is this season, early next season, whenever that is, Bill will make that decision because he has with so many great players in that Patriots organization. They're set up for a transition. When that is, no one has any idea when that's going to be.
Howie, let's talk about the big game this week on Fox. Seattle might have the best defense that we've seen in football the last 10 years, traveling to Green Bay, which we know Aaron Rodgers, best quarterback, best player in the game. What are you looking for in this game?
Well, it could be a preview. I mean, it's, to me, I've always been fascinated with the culture that Pete Carroll's created, John Schneider out there in Seattle, and I'm fascinated. You know, it's kind of like Coney Ealy going to New England. You know, we talked about that a little bit earlier. Players that you don't trade away. You don't trade away quarterbacks. You don't trade away dynamic wide receivers. You don't trade away shutdown corners. You don't trade away dominant defensive linemen. Coney Ealy, if Carolina had gone on and won that Super Bowl, probably would have been the MVP of the Super Bowl. He had a phenomenal game. He's a young player. He goes to New England. It doesn't work out. Sheldon Richardson is, to me, a rare talent at the defensive tackle position. And he adds to what is already one of, as you mentioned, the top defenses over the last 7 years, what they've done up there. Their commitment to being great in their culture and their level of accountability with one another defensively has always intrigued me. And I think Sheldon Richardson could be a major piece there. Now, in New York, the talent's there. Sometimes it showed, sometimes it didn't. And I think that frustrated them, and there were some issues in the locker room, et cetera, and for whatever reason, it just didn't work out in New York. I think that culture and that leadership in Seattle can bring something out in Sheldon Richardson. He might be the acquisition of the year on defense in the NFL.
You mentioned Sheldon Richardson having some locker room issues in New York. So one of the stories of the offseason, I'm curious your opinion on it, has been Seattle's locker room issues, an offense-defense struggle. And you very often, when one unit's really dominant, hear about that. It seems like we hear about it more with the Seahawks ever since the Super Bowl that they didn't win than with any other team. Is that a real thing? Is that something that concerns you? Or is that something that it's just we got stuff to talk about, so we talk about it, but it's not something to worry about once the games start? Probably
a little bit of both. I think Seattle is kind of a social experiment to a certain degree. Pete Carroll's an interesting guy. He and I've read articles where Pete needs to be tougher. Pete's tough. Players are held accountable there. They're also given the ability to speak their mind. And Richard Sherman is an intelligent guy. He's a great player. I think he was dinged at points last year. I'm looking forward to seeing him healthy. The question is, who's going to play opposite him? That locker room is fine. The divide there for me as an outsider looking in is more offense versus defense. And, every year they seem to revamp the offensive line, and now they've got Lacey in at running back. And, they've been trying to kind of patch people in to replace Marshawn Lynch. And Marshawn was so much tied to their identity, and that defensive side of the ball had such a great deal of respect for Marshawn. And once again, I think that defensive side holds everybody accountable, whether it's the offensive coordinator, the running back, the quarterback, the offensive line. But how that offensive line plays will be a big key, and I think the defense could be dominant.
Howie, let's skip to the Giants and the Cowboys, a Sunday night's game, big marquee game, NFC East matchup. You've been talking about defenses. How does Dallas cover up their defense that last year Ezekiel Elliott in that rushing attack was able to be a great deodorant for.
Is Ezekiel playing?
Yes, week number 1, yes.
Okay, well, week number 1 it's not as much of a concern because that offensive line, Ezekiel Elliott, their ability to dictate terms, control the clock, time of possession, etc., it has a trickle effect to their defense. And I think they do a great job down there of flying around. You don't know who a lot of the players are. Lee is a great middle linebacker. I think Smith, getting him back healthy, will be a big deal. Crawford's back. They're going to have to win the same style of game they did last year. It's going to have to be on offense, and it's going to have to be with a physical, tempo-setting offensive attack. And I think Dak Prescott, everyone talks about Dak Prescott. Will he regress in his second year? Why would you even think that? Dak Prescott had no stage fright as a rookie. Got thrust into the lineup early in the season. Granted, it's maybe the best, I think it's by a wide margin, offensive line in football. Maybe the best running back in football. Witten looks like he's running a 5.3, but all he does is he's open and he catches balls. I don't know how that happens. Dez is a dynamic player. You know, they have dynamic players on the outside, but I think everything starts with their offensive line and their running attack.
Howie, the big question mark on the Giants side is going to be whether Odell Beckham Jr. is going to play. He hasn't practiced all week. He's been questionable. He's not even sure if he can play with that high ankle sprain. This is an offense that we're all talking about going through this guy. How can this team do without him in the lineup?
Well, you know, I think it's one of those injuries, you know, and I guess I saw he was dancing on Instagram. I don't know. I don't know what that means in terms of your ability to play on Sunday night. But I would be surprised if he doesn't play. I think there's a lot of pressure to play. You know, as players, we feel that internally, we feel that externally, and particularly in a market like that. And when you're a marquee player like Odell is, and you're as explosive and dynamic an offensive weapon as there is in the National Football League. But let's not forget, you know, you've got Brandon Marshall, you've got Shepard, you've got this kid Ingram. I think the Giants, if that offensive line can come together, and that's a big if, based on last year, this football team can be really, really good, and Eli will have a great year. Now, what you don't want to do is you don't want to run the risk of, are we going to have Odell? Would you rather have Odell for 1-2 weeks and then have him hampered the whole year? Or do we want to play it safe and let this thing play out and get him back healthy and have him for 14, 15 really good games?
Well, you touched on exactly what I wanted to ask you about, Howie, which is the smart thing, probably, even though it's against the Cowboys, divisional game, first game of the year, Odell, get back to full strength or as close as you can. But
nobody's full. The minute you walk on the field is the best you're going to feel.
Well, get as close as you can without re-aggravating an injury. But as a player, not that you had many awful games, but I'm sure you had some games that bothered you. Odell had a game.
I burnt my entire uniform, Nick.
Really?
Literally went back to the facility, put tape remover on my uniform and burnt it because I didn't want to wear that uniform again. There was only a couple of them, but yeah.
Okay, so imagine that scenario, except it's a playoff game. You're I don't know how old you were when that happened. I mean, Odell is coming off what he believes to be the worst game of his career. The situation that he thinks he's expressed to us was the most embarrassing professional one of his career. And now he might not play week 1. As a player, does the way the last game went down, essentially, put more pressure on him internally? I got to get out there. Even if we're not full strength, I got to go play.
Nick, I think as athletes, you've got to, that's in the rearview mirror. I can't dwell on that. I'm dealing with the here and now. I can only deal with today. I can't take, win the day was a saying that Chip Kelly had at Oregon, and I'm a big believer in it. Win the day. I can't do anything about yesterday, can't do anything about tomorrow. I can control right now, and I think Odell has to do that. And only Odell knows. And I've had the feeling through this whole injury, and it brings up a whole nother topic of where are we headed in terms of the strike zone on players. I mean, you can't hit high. I think we're heading in the direction of not being able to hit low. So is it the American League strike zone or is it the National League strike zone? And it's a challenge because the game is bigger, stronger, and faster. These safeties, you see the hit right here. It's, that's where DBs, linebackers are forced to go now, because if you're anywhere around the chest, chances are you're going to slide up to the chin. I've had the impression throughout this whole kind of lead up to this game that Odell's going to play. That's just my gut. I don't know about you, Chris.
Well, that could be your gut. I might have to talk to you.
You're
after.
his nephew. He's your nephew.
Hey, Howie,
I'm not related.
Howie, he's a wide receiver. It's a primetime game. The lights are going to be on. It's going to be hard for him not to be.
He is the closest thing we have to a moth in the NFL. You turn that backlight on, that moth just flies to the light.
Howie, to shift gears a little bit, because you and I are both fathers. My son Deron's played. You got two sons playing in the NFL. The reason why you know New England's defense.
Third one in personnel.
Excuse me?
I have a third one in the personnel department with the Raiders.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I don't want to cheat him.
I don't want to cheat. If I went home today and didn't mention him, his mama would slap me on the back of my head.
Yeah, well, we know the boys got all the talent from the mom. But I want to talk to you as a dad, because I saw something that me, as one of the players that's represented the National Football League for a long time, and for you as a player, that's one of the greatest players that ever played this game. I saw your son put his hand on the back of another African-American player during the national anthem to lend support. As a father, given what we're going through as a country, how did that make you feel?
Chris is an old soul, and anyone who has multiple children, all your kids are different. Same house, same love, same discipline. The overall philosophy in the house was one of being all-inclusive, and obviously that rubbed off on Chris. And I think he is someone who has he has a unique perspective that, he's not just going to – he wants to have an impact. He wants his life to have meant something. He builds wells in East Africa. He's building, I think, their 24th well in East Africa, bringing clean water to over 100,000 people. That was Chris being Chris. And you know what? I texted him that week, Chris. I texted him, thank you for being you. I don't say it enough. I think it all the time, but thank you for being you. And that's who he is.
Let's move on to a huge showdown this weekend. Seahawks at Packers. Why do you have to throw him under the bus? These are the two Vegas favorites to get the Super Bowl out of the NFC. But let's focus on Sunday. Nick, which team wins this game?
You called me Chris just earlier.
I did call you Chris earlier.
Whatever.
But to my credit, you have one-syllable names with an I in both of them. So
that's an excellent point. Seattle wins the game. Seattle wins the game. If I'm Green Bay, I hate that this is how the season starts. The most ferocious defensive line in football, and that was before they added Sheldon Richardson. They are now, this is the type of game that you see to open your season. You're like, yeah, we want to win. We're 3-point favorites at home. But can we just please make sure Aaron Rodgers gets out of this thing without someone rolling on his ankle, without someone hitting him in the ribs? That people are going to point to, oh, these two teams played last year, and the Packers blew them out. Seattle did not have Earl Thomas in that game. There was starting to be some dissension. I think there might be dissension later in the year for Seattle. It's week 1. Everyone's as healthy as they're going to get. I like Seattle significantly in this game, even though it's in Green Bay.
I love Seattle as a team. They're my Super Bowl pick. I believe that their defense will play on a historic level this season. I believe that the reemergence of Jimmy Graham as a dominant tight end, lost 20 pounds this offseason. Doug Baldwin will be the feature wide receiver. Jermaine Kearse traded to the New York Jets. Now, that's going from the White House to the outhouse. Yeah. You know, so I like Russell Wilson's ability to be able to stay healthy, but I've lost too many games in Lambeau Field. I'm going with the Lambeau mystique. Forget about Aaron Rodgers being the best player. It's hard to win in Lambeau. In week number 1, I'm going with the home team and go with the Pack.
You just still have like weird flashbacks about driving through the city and smelling the bratwurst.
It's not a city. It's a town.
Okay, sorry.
Green Bay is a town, but it's one of the best trips, and it takes you back when you first started playing football, Little League and high school, because it's that type of environment. It's a special place.
Don't you hear like John Facenda going, great teams aren't always great. They're only great when they have to be. Dun, 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 dun. He's like, and then you make a left at the cheese shop, and then you keep going.
I mentioned that if you're the Packers, you hate that you're playing Seattle week 1. If you're Seattle and you know, because you know before the order of the schedule comes out, you know your home road games. If you're Seattle, aren't you thrilled that you're playing Green Bay before it gets cold? Like, if you're Seattle, aren't you glad if you've got to go to Green Bay, have it be the first week of the season?
Most of the skilled guys, Slayer's talking about we don't look at the schedule. The skilled guys look at the schedule because you do not want to go to Green Bay, Chicago, and Buffalo
in the dead
late.
Of winter.
Now, the offensive linemen, they don't care. Big fat dudes, they love to play when it's nice and cool or cold. So it makes a big difference. But this is one of several games that we really like this week.
The way I see it, if you talk about structured plays, I think this goes to Seattle. I think once that breaks down, you talk about plays outside of structure, Green Bay definitely has the advantage. And I love the fact that Aaron Rodgers thrives in those kind of situations. They happen to be my pick.
That's your Super Bowl pick.
That's a great analysis. I love that.
And I'm not trying to take any shots at Aaron Rodgers. I think Aaron Rodgers is the best quarterback in the NFL.
But take your shot.
No, people got on me because I said that Jordy Nelson wasn't a dynamic playmaker. People were like, oh, really? He led the NFL in touchdowns. Man, do you know what it takes to lead the NFL in touchdowns very often? Play with Aaron Rodgers. James Jones once led the NFL in touchdowns. Like, now my man Cris Carter led the NFL in touchdowns a few times playing with guys that, let's just say they weren't Aaron Rodgers caliber. Like, Rodgers is the cure-all for that team. I just think Seattle might have a little too much. So I think Aaron Rodgers is great. I just think Seattle as a whole is too good at the
It's going to be a great game.
Yeah.
All right, so guys, we get our full first Sunday of football this weekend, 12 games. What other games intrigue you? And we've talked about the big ones, but is there another game on the schedule right now that you can't wait to watch?
I think the team that is not receiving the adequate amount of respect is the Oakland Raiders. And they travel to the Tennessee Titans. So last year, within a 60-minute, hour-and-a-half time, Derek Carr and Marcus Mariota both get hurt in their season. Into the Titans' chance of being a wild card. And, of course, Oakland had Super Bowl aspirations. So seeing both of these young quarterbacks, and we always talk about, oh, man, he's not a franchise quarterback. Both of these teams have franchise quarterbacks. Oakland has one of the best offensive lines, and the return of beast mode with the Raiders, that's a must-see game.
I'm glad you brought up the Oakland-Tennessee game, because if you were to ask me, pick 2 teams in the league that the general public is the highest on, that you, Nick Wright, is the lowest on, it's the 2 teams playing in this game, Oakland and Tennessee. The Raiders last year, it was one of the softest 12-4s you're ever going to see. Everyone paid attention to Detroit, all those fourth-quarter comebacks. Oakland would have set the NFL record for fourth-quarter comebacks if Detroit didn't set a better record the same season. Oakland last year, according to points scored versus their opponent or point differential, they were a 9.5-win team that somehow won 12 games. And then everyone's telling me Tennessee is the team to beat in the AFC South. Mm-hmm. Man, I watched Marcus Mariota a lot this preseason. I expected, and maybe it'll come, maybe it's just the preseason, I expected that next jump that I think we're going to see this year out of Jameis to start seeing it out of Mariota, and I didn't. So I'm excited to watch that game, if for no other reason than to see if I'm right, that these are 2 teams that some people have going to the AFC Championship game, if not further. And I have both of these teams missing the postseason entirely.
What's the mentality for a quarterback who knows he now has his money, he now has his stay with the team, and he's coming in, and this is now 100% his journey? Is there a different approach to the start of the season, knowing that's your team now? For Derek Carr, obviously, we're talking about?
The approach can be different, but for most quarterbacks, the ones who have gotten the big contracts, they have the personality and the work ethic that match up with being that franchise guy. So what they end up doing is going back into the locker room instead of saying, I have security, they end up acting like they're a free agent. They end up acting like they were drafted in the 6th round. They turn it all the way around and use the psychology for themselves compared to now I have security where it hurts you. So you see the great quarterbacks and even the good quarterbacks, they realize, wow, now is the time. What if I play well through this contract? I might be able to get another contract. So it can be an empowering move for the quarterback.
Welcome back into First Things First. Joining us now is FS1 analyst Danny Cannell. Welcome, Danny.
Good morning.
So
good.
Hey.
I didn't get the Floral Friday memo.
Neither did Nick.
Right?
First shot fired.
No, you know, it's early. It's Friday.
By Mr. GQ.
Yes,
we knew you were coming.
I try to keep up with you, CC. It's good
You got a
seeing
little
you.
pink palette thing going, so it's actually good.
Thank you.
So top 5 matchup going down in Columbus on Saturday. First-year Oklahoma coach Lincoln Riley and the number 5 ranked Sooners are taking on Urban Meyer and the number 2 Ohio State Buckeyes. Danny, let's start it off with you. After struggling early against Indiana last week, should the Buckeyes be on upset alert?
I don't think they should be on upside alert. I think they're clearly the better team in this situation. I think last year's matchup was very revealing about how far apart these two programs are when Ohio State goes into Norman, completely dominates that game, wins by 3 touchdowns. Now, I look at some of the advantages in this game. I think Oklahoma has the advantage at quarterback with Baker Mayfield returning. He's one of these guys that has been at the Heisman Trophy ceremony seemingly every year. He's been there. But this year, Baker Mayfield doesn't have Joe Mixon, Samaj P. Ryan, D.D. Westbrook out on the outside. And J.T. Barrett does have some weapons on his side. Most importantly, he's got a run game where I believe Ohio State can dominate that line of scrimmage, get their new star, J.K. Dobbins, going, the new running back that they found. Mike Weber, when he comes back healthy, I just see too many weapons that Ohio State has on their side of the ball for Oklahoma to be able to pull off the upset in the shoe.
Now, you watched the Ohio State-Indiana game last week. We know Oklahoma is going to try to duplicate some of the things that they did. Are you saying that the wide receiving core at Oklahoma, they're probably not as good as the wide receivers that Indiana had going against those new cornerbacks for Ohio State?
No, they're probably better. They're probably better than Indiana. So
they had problems with them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Indiana threw for 400 yards on Ohio State secondary. That's a cause for concern. My thing is Ohio State should be able to run and control the clock and keep that offense off of the field. So Ohio State, I felt most confident that they were going to win their conference. When you look at the powerhouses across the country, Alabama, were they going to win the SEC? Clemson or Florida State, USC or Stanford. I thought it was the easiest pick of mine in the preseason to say Ohio State is going to win the Big Ten. For that to happen, J.T. Barrett has to take that next step as a quarterback, not an athlete playing the position, but throwing the football around the field, because he can get you yards on the ground, but he has to develop that mid to long range passing game for them to be that national championship contender.
That's the part that stuck out to me when I watched Ohio State. Now, I was rooting for Indiana just because I wanted to see my partner in pain, but just watching,
just messed up.
Just the first week of the show.
Right.
Just watching, especially the first 2.5 quarters of that game, I said, man, J.T. Barrett's accuracy is a concerning factor. Now, J.K. Dobbins was a revelation, a 5'8" true freshman, just the second true freshman ever to start week 1 at running back for Ohio State. He was amazing, but I'm watching J.T. Barrett, and then the next day, or 2 days later, watching Baker Mayfield just light up the world.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, I know in college it's not as quarterback reliant as you are in the pros, but it's still pretty quarterback reliant. That's a big mismatch to me. That's the one significant edge I feel Oklahoma has, and I worry about J.T. Barrett's accuracy.
I do, too. I think there's a couple things you have to remember. I think you have to remember that Kevin Wilson, new offensive coordinator there in Columbus, still is figuring out J.T. Barrett's strengths and weaknesses. I thought you saw some learning pains there in that first half. But what they settled down with and what they reverted back to was what they've been doing the past few years with J.T. Barrett. Urban Meyer started taking the reins, saying, hey, let's get him run game going. Let's run him a little bit. I am with you. You can get away with J.T. Barrett playing the quarterback position the way he did last year, probably 9 games of the season. But there are 3 or 4 games you have to have him step up and make some critical passes. And this weekend's probably going to be one of those games. I think he'll be able to do that. But when you play Michigan in Ann Arbor, when you have the Big Ten championship game at Penn State, you have to have him take that next step as a quarterback.
Danny, you have concern about the playmakers. In the last couple years, Ohio State has had 2 receivers that left early that probably shouldn't. They're on NFL rosters, but they could have been stars. Redshirt sophomores had at least 2 years left to play. Do you think that hurt the young core? And did you like what you saw from Indiana against Indiana the second half?
Yeah, I did. I still think there has to be that guy that steps up, the guy that was a Percy Harvin for Urban Meyer at Florida, that type of playmaker.
Paris Campbell.
Yes, exactly. But now he had a critical drop in that game because J.T. Barrett still threw over 300 yards, but that was about a 50-yard completion for a touchdown that he would have had, where all of a sudden his stat line looks a lot better. Maybe we're not sitting here wondering, how does he look as a passer, even though he delivered it exactly where he needed to. Great throw. So I think that has to be the emergence of that type of player, the guy who you can get the ball in his hands and just take it over to kind of, maybe it's J.K. Dobbins. It doesn't matter what position it is for Ohio State, but they have to have that guy who's an elite difference maker in the game.
You also can't overlook how good this team is at home.
Yeah. They
played really, really well at home. They haven't lost in a while. But let's move on to, we talk about the Patriots and how dominant they are in the NFL. Not to rub some salt in your wounds, Danny, but Alabama's coming off a dominating win against your Florida State Seminoles last week. Alabama ranked #1 in the AP poll this week, receiving 60 of 61 first-place votes. How big is the gap between Alabama and, every other team?
If there are 128 teams in college football at the FBS level, that gap is extremely significant in about 120 of those. Like, they don't have a chance. Now, there are about 7 or 8 schools, Florida State being one of them. Florida State played really poorly, gave them about 14 points, some of the turnovers early in that game. You can't afford to do that. But I look at some other schools, and here's the bad thing for Alabama. Some of those schools are within their own division in the SEC West, because I think LSU has the capabilities. We still have to see LSU if they take that next step, but I think that gap is not so far with LSU.
Right.
I think it's there with Auburn, who they have to go to play the Iron Bowl at Auburn. That's a game-changing, season-changing type of game for both of those squads. But they do have elite-level talent. My question mark for Alabama becomes, is the offense going to evolve to a point where when they face a team like Clemson and they get into a shootout, when they face an Auburn, when they face an Ole Miss, a Texas A&M, some of these teams that run up-tempo, that can throw it around, that can make a few plays, can they respond and get those plays on the offensive side of the ball? Because they've gotten away with making those plays on the defensive side of the ball quite a bit. Last year, they were down 24-3 to Ole Miss.
Yeah.
The defense gets the sack, fumble, turnover, scoop and score. That is a game-changing play for Alabama. I want to see them get those on the offensive side of the ball, more consistency. But again, much like we talked about Ohio State, they have a new offensive coordinator, too, that they're breaking in Brian Daboll.
Right, and you're also wondering, is Hurt going to make that jump? We were critical of J.T. Barrett, a younger Hurt there at Alabama with a lot of experience. When is he going to be a capable passer? Because that's what makes Alabama lethal, when they can run it down your throat in the play-action pass on a regular basis.
Jalen Hurts had an impressive freshman run. It showed poise beyond his years. But I think the loss of Lane Kiffin, I don't think can be emphasized enough. He was one of the best play callers in game, finding weaknesses. And how many times we see him, the ball's in the air, he's going touchdown. He knew it was going to be there. That's the type of vision that he had. I don't know if Brian Daboll has that yet, or has that feel for Jalen Hurts, what he likes.
And I know Brian Daboll is not the buffer that Lane Kiffin is between the quarterback and Nick Saban.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to play for Nick Saban. It's almost impossible as a quarterback. And you need someone who has the guts like Lane would do. And he would stand up to Nick Saban.
Why is it impossible?
Because this is a college kid. And Nick Saban can be very intimidating. Every kid cannot respond, especially quarterbacks. These guys aren't used to being yelled at. Guys like me, we're used to being yelled at.
Of course you.
In a certain way. So you have to coach the quarterback. And Nick, he has pro personnel everywhere on the roster except quarterback. And I have seen through the years, he chokes out the offense. He chokes out the coordinator, that he doesn't have the full recipe of calling all the plays in the playbook. So Danny he's followed college football. He's one of the best on it, and he's seen it. Nick Saban is a problem as far as quarterbacks are concerned.
But does he know that? So get some
He can't
pro
control
personnel in
himself.
there.
He can't.
No, but remember all those screaming matches between Lane Kiffin and Nick Saban when Nick Saban's cussing him out and, and right in front of his whole team?
Yes.
I'd rather have him cussing out his offensive coordinator than the quarterback. So that was that buffer you're talking about. But the reason those screaming matches were taking place is Lane Kiffin saying, hey, I got opportunities for big plays. And Nick was saying, why? We don't need them. And maybe they don't.
Right.
But it never got them in trouble last year, and it probably won them a lot of games that they were making those big plays.
Just one quick note. Jenna mentioned correctly about how great Ohio State is at home. Alabama, unless the other team has Johnny Manziel or for some reason it's Ole Miss.
Right.
They're at home, they're not losing. So you really just have to look at their road games, and man, they got lucky with the schedule this year.
They did.
I mean, their road games at Vandy, okay. At A&M, they might have a new coach by then. At Mississippi State, it's just the Iron Bowl.
Don't write off Texas A&M. I know a lot of people are going to do that. People have fired Kevin Sumlin. They still have the type of athletes that could match up. And more importantly, I do feel like there's a formula to beat Alabama. I think you have to run up-tempo, no huddle, as fast as you can go. You have to have a mobile, here's the catch, you have to have a mobile elite quarterback. So it has to be both of those things, because that's what Johnny Manziel was. Now, Cam Newton was a freak show. I mean, he was able to pull off these types of things. You saw it, Deshaun Watson. He's had spectacular games.
Yes.
Those types of systems plus that quarterback is the formula. The problem is not everybody has that luxury.
Thank you for listening to your First Things First podcast. I'm your host, Jenna Wolfe. We will be back at the same time tomorrow, 6:30 a.m. Eastern on FS1. Subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts. So long, everybody.